Renting versus buying is a topic that tons of people have covered, but not specifically for New York City, and certainly not with current information.
Because our market is so different from the rest of the country, we decided to put together a guide to help you know if it's better to rent or buy in New York City. Whether you're a first-time buyer or a current homeowner that's ready to sell and wondering what's next, we have answers for you.
Before we get started, I'm John.
And I'm Jonathan. And our team has a combined experience of over 50 years selling residential real estate in the city, with over $1 billion in sales volume.
We work with both buyers and renters, so you can be sure you're getting the absolute best information possible in this video. This is a huge topic, so we're going to break it down into sections to help you really understand which scenario might be right for you.
We'll start by addressing what you've probably been hearing in the news lately about interest rates and the rental market. Then move on to comparing and contrasting two of our current listings as both first-time purchases and if they were rentals. And lastly, talk about some of the intangible aspects of renting versus buying, like how hold time can really impact which scenario is right for you. But this isn't all about first-time buyers. If you're one of the many New Yorkers that have an adjustable rate mortgage with an introductory period that is maturing soon, you might also be weighing the options of renting versus buying. We'll cover those more specific scenarios too.
So let's start with the elephant in the room, interest rates.
In 2023 alone, we saw rates rise from 6.48% at the beginning of the year to 7.79% at their peak in late October.
They have dropped a bit since then, but regardless of what interest rates do in 2024, we know for a fact they aren't going back to 2 or 3% anytime soon.
So if you're trying to time the market for when interest rates will bottom out again, you're going to be in for a frustrating experience. Our best advice is to date your rate and marry your home.
I like that. You can always refinance down the road, and the cost of doing so will be minimal compared to the equity that you'll build.
Rental rates have been in the news lately too. StreetEasy recently predicted that Manhattan rents will decline in 2024.
But we're not so sure. The huge fluctuations that we've seen over the past few years tell us that rents will always follow the market, which is unlikely to continue to decline in the long term.
That's really the time horizon that people are considering when comparing renting versus buying anyway. Because of that, we'd expect an annual increase in rent correlated with inflation. In other words, 2 to 3% over the coming years, not a decline.
Let's start with this lovely apartment that we're sitting in at 200 East 74th Street, apartment 6B. It is a sun-drenched, airy 5-room convertible 3-bedroom home on the Upper East Side. It's currently configured as a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom home plus dining alcove with a spacious gallery, oversized great room, and separate dining room.
This home is listed for $1,495,000, and the building allows for up to 75% financing, meaning the down payment would be just under $374,000 with an interest rate of 6.5% and monthly maintenance of about $2,200. Now that leaves us with a monthly payment of about $9,000. For simplicity's sake, we'll say there's no other debt in the picture.
We also need to take into account the closing costs. The mansion tax is the largest of those, 1% of the purchase price. Attorney's fees and other closing costs will also need to be taken into consideration. All of that will add up to about $23,000. That puts us at about $397,000 to cover the down payment plus closing costs. There's still post-purchase liquidity to keep in mind since this is a co-op, but we'll cover that later in the video.
To help answer the question of whether renting versus buying is better for an apartment like this, we'll be comparing this purchase scenario to a rental of a similar size and finish. Our team ran the numbers, and we'd expect to find a rental of this type for about $7,500 a month. We also need to take into account first month's rent and a security deposit equal to the same amount, as well as a 3% rent increase per year. Now doing this, it would take about 4.4 years for buying to be cheaper than renting.
But if answering the rent versus buy question was as simple as plugging numbers into a calculator, we probably wouldn't even be making this video. There are a lot of things needed to be considered that can't be answered just by formulas and equations.
We'll give a lot more advice about answering the nuances of the rent versus buy question later in this video. But for now, we need to consider another purchasing scenario over at a second listing of ours. Let's go.
I think that's great. I will go. I'll go with you. I think you did great.
So you're gonna love this. I'll show you. It's right here.
Welcome to 40 West 77th Street, apartment 6D, a charming pre-war home on the Upper West Side. It's a one-bedroom, one-bathroom co-op with ultra high-end finishes. It has beautiful southern townhouse garden views, plenty of sunlight, and while it's definitely not the smallest or cheapest apartment you can find in the city, it's a great representation of what many first-time buyers are looking for in a smaller apartment.
So let's get into the financials. This home is listed for $1,150,000, and the building allows for up to 75% financing, meaning the down payment would be $287,500. Now, with an interest rate of 6.5% and monthly maintenance of about $2,000, that leaves us with roughly a monthly payment of $7,400.
We also need to take into consideration closing costs. All of that will total about $20,000. So that puts roughly $307,000 to cover the down payment plus closing costs.
We're going to be comparing this purchase scenario to a condo rental of similar size and level of finish. Our team ran the numbers, and we'd expect to find a rental of this type for about $5,200 a month. Now, taking into account first month's rent, security deposit equal to the same amount, as well as a 3% rent increase per year, it would take about 6.5 years for buying to be cheaper than renting.
If you could predict the future and know exactly what happened between now and 6.5 years from now, it'd be easier to decide whether to rent or to buy. But the uncertainty that we'll face in our lives makes that pretty hard.
By far, the biggest factor to consider whether you're better off buying or renting is how long you plan to stay in that particular home. If you expect big lifestyle changes in the next few years, or you simply aren't sure where your career is going to take you, renting is probably a better choice.
But if you're sure you'll be comfortable in the space that you can afford for the amount of time that it would take to skew the balance toward making buying the better financial choice, then go ahead and put in an offer. With that being said, the best advice that we can give you is to err on the side of setting yourself up to be flexible, which sometimes means renting, sometimes means setting your sights on a slightly larger apartment based on where you are and where your life is going.
If you're a long-term hold, meaning you're planning on sticking around for a number of years, buying an apartment is one of the best uses for your money. What other investment lets you host friends and family, have a calm oasis away from the city, and give you the opportunity to put down solid roots? Certainly not stocking.
Earlier in this video, you may have noticed that we mentioned the buildings that we used as examples allowed up to 75% financing. That's a departure from the norm across the rest of the country. So let's dig a little deeper.
Down payments are often one of the biggest financial roadblocks for many first-time buyers. So you might be wondering if you could find another building that allows more of the price to be financed.
In all honesty, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a co-op in Manhattan that allows less than 20% as a down payment.
Now keep in mind, we are talking about cooperatives only. In a condominium building, the amount of financing is not limited, but in order to have that flexibility, you'll have a higher purchase price.
So what are you to do if you don't have several hundred thousands of dollars in liquid assets? Most first-time buyers don't. Well, you can continue to save up until you do, or sometimes a relative will be willing to gift you the down payment.
That comes with its own caveats though, since gifting is not allowed in all buildings. Now, if you are lucky enough to have a family member that's willing to chip in, be sure to reach out to a licensed professional
Like us.
to help you find an appropriate apartment that fits your financial profile.
Speaking of financial profile, let's take a second to talk about post-purchase liquidity.
Post-purchase liquidity, which is also sometimes called post-closing liquidity, is the amount of liquid funds you have available after you close on your apartment divided by your total fixed outgoing expenses, including the projected maintenance and mortgage payment on the subject property.
In other words, if you lost your job the day after closing, how long could you afford to pay your fixed monthly expenses from the remaining balance of your liquid assets?
Most buildings in Manhattan are looking for a minimum of 24 months of post-purchase liquidity. But that isn't true across every building. Sometimes they can require much, much more.
So what would that mean for each of our purchasing scenarios? For the $1.15 million apartment, you would need a post-purchase liquidity of about $177,000. For the more expensive $1.495 million apartment, you'll need roughly $216,000. And while we're now getting a little bit more into financial qualification of buyers than a simple rent versus buy conversation, it's worth bringing up.
It's our job to help our clients understand the entire picture, which in Manhattan means having quite a bit of cash on hand after the transaction is complete. It would be heartbreaking to have saved up enough money for the down payment and for the closing costs, fall in love with an apartment, and then realize you can't actually purchase it because you don't have enough cash left over afterwards.
We're almost done with the financial portion of these other factors, but we do need to touch on the principle of opportunity cost.
Opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when you make a financial decision. For example, would you make more in the long run putting your money in another investment rather than purchasing real estate?
After all, while the apartment you buy will be a place to live, it'll also be an investment, and probably the largest one that you will ever make.
The S&P 500 has an average rate of return of about 10%. Manhattan real estate has historically seen about a 7% rate of return. So it might seem on its face like a poor financial decision to tie all of your money up in an apartment.
But because you're able to leverage debt, which is just a fancy way to say borrow money, to make your initial investment in your apartment, your return will actually be higher.
If you have to pay to live somewhere anyway and you have the funds to purchase, it's almost always a wise decision financially.
There's one last category of things to consider when weighing buying versus renting, and they have very little to do with the finances of things.
If you are tired of living according to your landlord's rules and it would bring you happiness to have more freedom and control over your environment, that's enough reason to buy.
The same goes for if you want to personalize your apartment with a specific look or style that would require renovations. We only get one life, so living it as authentically as possible is important. And if that means purchasing real estate so you can turn your apartment into exactly what you've always wanted, then that's worth it. Just run it by us to make sure that you aren't personalizing so much that your apartment will be difficult to sell down the road.
Owning real estate also gives you a lot more stability than renting does. Any renters that lived through the wild roller coaster that was 2020 and 2021, trying to find a place to live, knows that needing to find a new place on short notice is really stressful. We focused a lot on first-time buyers in this video, but if you happen to be one of the many Manhattanites that bought an apartment a few years ago with an adjustable rate mortgage with an initial fixed rate period that's coming due soon, you might be wondering what's next.
We've worked with many clients that have non-traditional mortgages like 7-1 ARMs, and our best advice is to reach out to licensed professionals like us
to determine whether you should stay put and ride out the rates until they fall a bit more, sell and rent, or sell now and purchase a different apartment.
While our best advice is to reach out to someone to talk specifics, we also know that you're looking for answers. So let's take a look at a few different scenarios to give you some advice on what to do in each.
Most people with adjustable rate mortgages buy them because they offer flexibility if you think you might want to move or expect to be in a different financial position after your introductory period comes due.
Scenario 1 is staying in your current home, riding out the interest rates and waiting to refinance when rates go down. This does require that your home be a good fit for you long term. So if you're feeling like it's too small or inconvenient in some other way, this might not be the best solution. But if you like where you live, you aren't competing against other buyers to refinance your home, this is really the least risky option, as long as you have the funds to cover the adjustable rates and can put up with a bit of uncertainty about your monthly costs until you can refinance.
Scenario 2 is selling your home and finding somewhere new to live. Our needs often change so much faster than we think they will, so it's common to need to move to a larger or differently configured space. There's two ways this can go. Either you transition to a rental and wait for the rates to go down, or you sell and purchase a new property now.
Renting gives you a lot of flexibility in the short term. So if you think rates will go down to a level that you can see yourself purchasing in a year or two, that might be the best option for you. With that being said, if you're trying to time the market based on interest rates, know that you're in for a very difficult time finding your next purchase because all of the pent-up demand.
Everyone is waiting for interest rates to fall. And when they do, we are going to be very busy. That means that you'll be up against many other buyers vying for the same apartments, which will drive up prices. While your rate will be lower, your total financed amount will likely be higher than it would be now.
If you're sure that you want to move and don't want to risk the high level of competition we expect to see when rates drop, purchasing now, even with higher interest rates, might be your best option. After all, if your adjustable rate mortgage is close to market rates anyway, and you know you want out of your current home, purchasing a new apartment, even at a higher interest rate, gives you the best outcome. You can always refinance if rates drop later, but you won't be stuck living in a space that doesn't fit your needs, while also paying market interest rates. And you also won't be up against the huge buyer pool that's going to enter the market when rates finally drop.
So whether you're a potential first-time buyer weighing the pros and cons of renting versus buying, or are a current homeowner with an adjustable rate mortgage or a strong need to move into a different space, the decision to rent or buy is complicated. We strongly recommend reaching out to licensed professionals
Like us,
to navigate the complexities and ensure you make the best informed decision for your unique situation.
I'm John Gastaska,
And I'm Jonathan Kopp.
and we look forward to meeting you.
We do.